When you're waiting for the race, you're sitting, you've got the world record holder one side and the world champion the other side, and all these sort of people. I mean, you never meet anyone who is not a national champion.
Shaun Lightman had worked hard to qualify for the Olympics, but the challenge of Mexico in 1968 was formidable, and not just in terms of the opposition.
We had press articles saying that people would die. You know, you're going to die.
Those warnings were because his 50-kilometre race was being held at altitude.
I can remember walking up the stairs to the flat that we were in, breathing heavily. You know, and I was thinking, I've got to race 50 kilometres and I can't even get up the stairs.
Race day was like nothing he'd experienced before.
And it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit when we started. The first thing that seemed very odd was that at about 10 kilometres, we passed Bernhard Leuchker from East Germany sitting on the side of the road, and he'd collapsed.
Heat wasn't the only problem. Student riots meant a heavy military presence was in place.
We had soldiers every 10 metres both sides of the road in case, you know, because there might be riots. And in my case, it was doctors. And the doctor came up and said to me, do you want to retire?
Did Shaun retire? Was the heat too much? This is Shaun Lightman's walking tale, and it all began when he was very young.
From when I was 3 or 4, my parents lived with my grandparents, and my parents, to get away from the constrictions of home, used to cycle in the summer from Heathrow or Hounslow to Littlehampton and back. So from a very young age, I was used to being on the road for a very long time.
How long roughly, for those listeners that are abroad or not familiar with that?
Oh, I see. Well, the distance is about 60 miles. And they used to camp about Dial Post, which is just by the South Downs. So they would cycle 40 miles, 45 miles, camp, then go to the beach, and then come home. And we did that virtually every weekend. And for fun, I used to run along sand dunes at the age of 5 or 6, just because I enjoyed it, not realizing this was brilliant training. And then I went to a school where we had a very good PE master. And I was in a class where we had the national 100 yards in those days, champion, and the county 440-yard champion, 880-yard champion, discus throw and javelin throw, all in the same class.
Oh, wow.
And I was sort of the odd one out, really. The only thing I could do, I knew the further I went, the more I could win. I then joined, back in, let's see, but it must have been 57, 70, no, sorry, I'm talking about 57, 58. I joined Thames Valley Harriers, and as a sort of 13, 14-year-old, and I was quite good. I got into the Valley team, but I was always 4th or 5th. And they trained at a track called Alperton, and at Alperton they had some people who were race walking, and we also did race walking at school. And I worked out that I could either do the 440 yards, a quarter mile and the half mile, when I thought, well, I can come second in the half mile, or the half mile and the half mile walk. So I went in for the walk and won it from a chap called Jim Alders.
It's amazing how you always remember the name.
Yes. And then with the Valley training at Alperton, there was also these race walkers, and I decided that I'd have a go. And they were coached by this chap, Harold Whitlock, who'd won the Olympic gold medal in Berlin.
Wow.
And his name's still as a Sieger in the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, still there. And he was coaching a chap called Don Thompson, who had won the London to Brighton 8 years. Well, when he finished, he'd won it 8 years and was an Olympic gold medalist. So for an 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old to train with someone who won an Olympic medal was quite something. And I discovered that I was quite good at race walking. And so that's how it all began.
And then, of course, we have to ask, it doesn't just stop there. You talk about, you're touching on the Olympics there, but you yourself went to the Olympics.
Yes, that was in 1968. Well, what happened was when I left school in 62, so I was junior 1 mile national champion and record holder. So I became record holder for the county, the Southern Counties and national in 62. At the same time, I was not only a sprinter, but I also trained with Don Thompson, that is, and we used to do sort of every other week, 20 miles. So Don used to go out and do 10 miles in the morning. When we joined him, we had a group, Martin Higgins, who came third in the national championships, Jim Richards, myself, Arthur Thompson. He's still walking at the age of 80.
Wow.
And we used to do 20 miles from Hendy's Corner near Heathrow to Windsor Castle and back. And that gave me the background for long distance. I went to college, St David's College, Lampeter in Wales. And it was very difficult to keep training there because it was mainly a sort of rugby focus. And when I got my degree, my coach, the chap I'd helped in the London to Brighton, Tom Misson, now he was as good as Don Thompson. Tom was in the Olympics in 1960, but because of a foot injury, he only finished 6th. But he came to me and my parents in 66, I think it must have been, and said that if I put my mind to it, I could become an international. So I thought, well, we'll have a go. And he took me under his wing. I mean, I actually stayed with him for a couple of summers. And he really gave me the background, building on all the other things that I had done, to become a fairly good athlete. As a result, I won a number of prestigious events. Let's think. There would be the national 10 miles. Well, I came second in the national 10 miles behind Ron Warwick. Tom said to me, either you could do the 20 kilometers, there are 2 Olympic events, 20 kilometers and 50 kilometers. Now, it's quite possible for somebody to come from nowhere and do 20 kilometers, but for 50 kilometers, you've got to do a lot of training. And he thought that with my background, the 50 kilometers would be the thing to go for. Okay. So we trained, I trained pretty hard for the winter, and in 67, I won the national 50 kilometers championship.
Wow.
By about 6 minutes. What happened, there was a whole bunch of us at 20, 25 kilometers, and I thought, this is jolly slow. So I just gave it all I had. And I managed to beat the field. But that might have been a one-off. And I then did the Hastings to Brighton, because we had this chap, Don Thompson, was still pretty good. And we were together for the first 13, 14 miles, a place called Windmill Hill. And I managed to get about 30 seconds up. And from 18 miles to 38 miles, I couldn't get away, but he couldn't catch me. So we finished the same distance apart. And that sort of laid down the marker. And then I went to East Germany for the World Championship. I did a very silly race. I tried to burn off the world record holder. Not a good idea.
Why? What happened? You have to share.
I had a very good. We went through halfway in 2 minutes, 2 hours 2 minutes, which was something like 5 minutes up on the world record at that point. And I had a bit of a bad patch after that and lost about 7 or 8 places. And Christoph Hohner, who was with me, also slowed down a bit, but he still won. And that really led on to the other bits and pieces. So that laid down a marker for the next year. And I had, again, I was aiming for the 50 kilometers, and the first 3 would qualify for the Olympic Games. And there was Paul Nihill, Brian Ely, myself, Ray Middleton, Don Thompson, all in a group. And eventually the group broke up. I managed to finish third. Paul won, Brian was second, I was third, and there was a big gap after that by about 4 or 5 minutes. So I got a letter from Prince Philip to say, could I go to the Olympic Games?
Just go through the emotions of you came third. You realised then, oh wow.
Well, it wasn't a foregone conclusion, because they might not send 3. But up until the Mexico Olympics, we'd always won a medal. So I think the British Athletic Board thought, well, send 6 walkers, 3 for the 20 and 3 for the 50.
You was one of the ones of the 50, and then a letter comes from Prince Philip to say you are off to Mexico. What was that feeling inside, that you're trying to represent your country?
Well, there's 2 sort of feelings. One is great delight, and the other is, oh my God, what am I doing here? Because you're sitting, when you're waiting for the race, you've got the world record holder one side and the world champion the other side, and all these sort of people. I mean, you never meet anyone who is not a national champion or in the first 3 in their country.
The build up to the event, what's involved with the training? So is it like running, where you'll do a tempo run, a hill?
It's very similar. Well, you've got to realise, of course, that training techniques between 68 and today have changed dramatically. We were really learning things quite quickly. And of course, Mexico is, 7,000 feet up. My coach suggested I trained using a gas mask, because that would reduce the air pressure. Well, I tried it once or twice. It wasn't very good.
What did your neighbours think at the time? Like, oh no, what's going on?
Oh, I don't know, really. The board sent me out to St. Moritz in Switzerland, because that's only half the height of Mexico, but it was fairly useful. I mean, I think I ought really to have been sent to Mexico, because we had press articles saying that people would die. You're going to die because of this. So it was a bit sort of concerning.
What, just because of the altitude?
Because of the altitude, yes. And the training, as you say, is very similar to what you might do for a sort of marathon, middle distance running. So you would do, I used to do sort of 50-kilometer training sessions. So it's a marathon a week, really, or 1, possibly 2. So on Saturday, if there were no races, I'd do 20 miles on Saturday and 50 kilometers on Sunday.
What did you do during the week? Did you carry on? Did you have a day job or studying? Or
oh yeah, I was a school teacher.
100%. So you was a school teacher during the week, and then in the evenings and weekends training to represent your country at the Olympics.
That's it. I taught PE, so the classes got my stretching exercises.
How do you feel in later times like now, that these athletes are 100% focused on the Olympics? There's no job, there's no study, it's all Olympics. I could be wrong there. They might.
You know Dina Asher-Smith? Well, I mean, she became world champion at the same time as studying for a degree at London University. Dina and I belong to the same club, and things have changed dramatically. But for Dina, there's this second bow to her string to her bow, and I think if you have just athletics, then things can go horribly wrong, and you've got nothing else. I think footballers have exactly the same problem. So when they finish, if a footballer gets injured and he hasn't got anything else, that's the end of his career.
So I'm just curious if we can go back in time, because we are talking decades here.
Oh yes.
That you did do the Olympics. How popular was race walking back then? Because nowadays, I'll be honest with you, when I met your daughter Sarah at Salsey Forest last year, and I was marshalling at the marathon she was doing, she was the only race walker there. It's very rare to see race walkers, go in there and say, I'm a race walker. I'm not, it's not Jeffing, I'm literally race walking this race. It's very rare that you come across these, and it's not really a popular activity, I'm not sure in schools nowadays, I could be wrong, but it's not really like a TV event. It's only when it comes to the Olympics that you're like, oh yeah, that does exist.
Yeah.
What was it like back then when you were race walking?
Well, I've got some photographs from 1908 from the London to Brighton, and it took. I mean, the crowds were huge, and they had to have police horses and policemen to hold back the crowds. That was in Brighton, and the same
was for race walkers, not runners.
No, that's race walker. And that sort of carried on really right up until about the mid-70s. So we and there were lots of races which were point to point. So there was Chippenham to Calne, for example, and you'd have huge crowds in the high street cheering you on as you went. And on the London to Brighton, you'd have, as you were going along, you'd get a group of cyclists cheering you on all the way, and as you pass pubs and so on, people would cheer and so on. The Leicester Mercury was the same, so crowds were enormous. But of course, what happened over the years was that the traffic got more and more faster and faster, and as a result, the races declined. So, I mean, on my last London to Brighton, Chelsea were playing Brighton in Brighton, and we had cars passing us at 60, 70 mile an hour all the way, every 10, 20 seconds. So it got quite dangerous eventually, and that really put a stop to the road racing, which meant that you were then taken into parks, and of course you get far fewer people. But up until the 70s, it was quite a well-known sport.
What surprised me, my good friend Leo, who I've had on a previous episode in the early days of Running Tales, he lives in Seville, and he's an international race walker. He's training for Tokyo at the moment, Olympics. And it wasn't really until I met him that I really knew about race walking, and I went to Portugal to watch him at one of his races with my husband.
Yes.
And he was saying, like, Portugal is very, they're very popular on race walking as well as Spain, but not really anywhere else.
Spain's very popular. Italy, Germany, Russia, China. Oh gosh, and most countries. I think there are more countries have race walkers than play football.
But why do you think in England or United Kingdom we've declined our interest in the sport?
It's a general decline in sport in general.
It's interesting you saying that, but if you've noticed with runners in the last even 5 years, how you've got like what I call us fun runners are on the increase, you know, through the charity.
Oh, yes.
Thing.
Yes.
You know, just look at the London Marathon now. It's just gone mad, high on numbers, you know, for marathons. Why do you think that race walking is not on the same level to get that attention and draw people in? Because not everyone is a runner, not every, you know, there are many walkers out there. You only have to look at park runs and, you know, just generally people during these lockdowns that are enjoying walking.
I think there's a difference between doing park runs, because I do lots of park runs. Well, I did until the lockdown. Do lots of park runs. I'm just coming up to 150. I'm about 147 at the moment, and there's a huge difference between that and competitive race walking. And the same also applies to things like marathon runners, 10,000 meters, 5,000 meters. I know at Blackheath and Bromley, we used to have about 7 or 8 people who were certainly sub 220.
Yeah.
Now I think we've got one, and a lot of there's about might be another 2 or 3 that are under 3 hours. And the same thing can go for 10,000 meters. All those very high long events, they have declined. At the same time, as you say, the park runs and the joggers, they are increasing at a tremendous rate. So there's obviously a cutoff at that point. I think also race walking is its own worst enemy in regard to advertising. Yeah. You know, I was in an event, or just a local event, but we happened to have Sandra Brown, who at that time was a world record holder for 100 miles. And she'd also walked from Land's End to John O'Groats, and I think she held the record at one stage. And there were other people. There was Paul Nihill, who was an Olympic silver medalist. There was myself and several other people who were internationals. And we were racing, and we got abuse. And I thought, you know, I think mainly because people had absolutely no idea what we'd done, because there was nothing to tell them. So I think we're, you know, from that point of view, we need a much better image. And of course, the image of race walking is also very much against it from that point of view. And again, people, I mean, if you go back to the 60s, 70s, it was quite normal for people to walk quite long distances, normally, so they would know what you were doing. But these days, because we all jump into cars, and the result is that people don't really understand quite what the human frame is being asked to do. So there's a lack of sympathy. Oh, and the other thing is, with sport, particularly with television, people want things to be short and quick. They don't want people to spend hours doing something. So I think for the danger is in the Olympic Games, for example, I think we could well lose, I hope we don't, but we could well lose both the walks, the marathon, 10,000 meters. I think they could all go, as well as quite a number of field events like shot put and discus, because they take so long and they don't make good television.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's quite an interesting.
That's
you say that, but I know, you know, for me, I love watching elite runners, you know, long distance runners. So I could sit and watch, and I will watch the comrades by YouTube, and that's, you know, that's the South African 54 plus miles. And the winner does it in like under 7 hours. But then my favorite bit is on the 12th hour, you know, when it's one leg across the line and the other, you know, the other side. And if you haven't got both feet crossing the line the other side and that bell rings, you don't get your medal, race over. So
yes, I can understand that.
I see what you mean, you know, on time scale restriction with TV. Hence why the comrades is not shown in the UK, which is a shame. But going back to the Olympics, we have to talk about it. You fly over. I take it, you know, aeroplanes were invented then. Only joking.
Yes,
They send you on a little boat, you know, across the ocean to Mexico.
It was a Boeing 707.
Oh, not Concorde. Was that still too early? No. And you arrive. You're in Mexico. What was the reception? What was the reception like?
Well, of course, there's a time difference. So we left London at 1 o'clock lunchtime, and we arrived at Mexico at 10 o'clock at night. We had a pretty rough ride on the plane. Went through a thunderstorm. So, and then you get out, and we had a Tijuana brass band to welcome us, and I think the officials were met by government officials and so on. And then you get onto coaches and off to the village, and that's it really.
But did you feel like royalty? Did you feel like a celebrity? Or at that point it was like, where's my bed? I've had enough.
I quite enjoyed that. It was quite nice. The village was, I mean, you think of athletes being put up in marvelous accommodation, but we were very cramped. I mean, there were, let's see, we had a room, I suppose, it had about 7 or 8 beds in it. And there were there were 3 race walkers, a couple steeplers, Maurice Herriot, the steeplechaser, and Jim Hogan. And unfortunately, Jim Hogan was a marathon runner, Irish but turned English, and he was the last up the stairs, and there wasn't a bed for him. And so the team manager said, "Oh, we'll put you in the shower for tonight." So they put a bed in the shower. For a joke, somebody pulled the chain. No water came out, but the ceiling fell down.
Oh no! So it was a nightmare.
Oh dear! So it was. Anyway, they managed to get Jim sorted out eventually.
And then, so how long was you there before you actually started your first race?
6 weeks.
You said 6 weeks. Oh wow!
6 weeks, which meant that my school, of course, had to give me 6 weeks off, which I think was quite a problem for them. And in fact, one person, I can't remember who it was, lost his job as a result.
Wow!
So you're all sort of crammed into this room. And of course, in those days, we didn't have anything about holding camps or being away from the other people. So you met all your competitors all the time. So, I mean, everybody who competed, it was much smaller, of course, in '68 than it is now. We were all crammed in the village together. And for me, I found that a bit overpowering, you know. And the other problem was the height, because you know, I can remember walking up the stairs to the flat that we were in, breathing heavily, you know, and I was thinking, I've got to race 50 kilometers and I can't even get up the stairs. So, you know, that was a bit concerning.
So did you sort out the breathing over the 6 weeks before you had your first race?
It got better, but you never actually acclimatise. I mean, the result, the research now shows that if you're born at sea level and you compete at altitude, you will never actually acclimatise completely. But what it does do, if you stay at altitude, then when you come back to sea level, there's a huge improvement. I certainly found that. I mean, you can't believe how much air there is down here. And when I came back, I had several personal bests in 7-mile, 10-mile races, just because I've been at altitude.
That's an interesting fact to know.
Yeah, I mean, there's been an awful lot of research into all this. And then there's the question is, how long do you spend at altitude before you come down? So do you spend, shall we say, a month at altitude? Although Paula Radcliffe has spent, I think, most of the year at altitude at Font-Romeu in France. Do you spend a month, then you come down, and do you race immediately, or do you wait for a couple of days? And I think, well, certainly at Munich, the next Olympic Games, the scientists didn't know, and there are all sorts of peculiarities. But I think they've got it sorted out now.
It sounds like cheating.
Well, it's not drugs, but
True.
I mean, why are the Ethiopians and the Kenyans so good at marathons and 10,000 meters? They live. Well, I think there are two reasons. One is they live at altitude, and it's quite very high. And the other is that if you look at where they come from, you can go to a group of villages and you'll see, well, this chap's got 3 Olympic golds. This person's got 1 Olympic gold. They all come from a very small area. And some people think that's because their ancestors were cattle rustlers and they had to run fast. And that's how they get, because it's in the genes. And I think there's some research, very recent research, that suggests that if you train very hard, the genes will actually change to make you into a good runner. So I think that's my understanding of the very latest. It's I don't know, about 2010, I think.
So how do you feel about these new Nike trainers?
Oh, I think they do. Well, I think that there are going to be changes in technology, because in Mexico, for example, we just had the very first tartan track. I think sort of the sponge. Yes. I mean, up until '67, we were all training on cinders. So to run on tartan was a huge improvement. There were problems with javelin throwers because they'd used to go on ash and then they'd slip, but on tartan they'd stop, and there were quite a number of people that pulled ligaments because they were stopping so quickly. But I mean, then they trained and changed the technique, and as a result, so you're going to get improvements in technology, and I think these shoes are just along that line. Now, if it's open to everybody, that's fine. What I do disagree with is using performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, that's an absolute no-no. But I've certainly raced against people who were on drugs. I know that.
Well, even back then in the 50s and 60s?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because I met one of the East Germans, well, a friend of mine met one of the East Germans, and they said, yes, their drug was put in their food. So that's how they were given it. And before a race, there'll be 3 in the team. 2 would have good races and 1 wouldn't. And that was the one that wasn't on the drugs for the purpose of testing.
So they were very hot on testing.
Well, I wouldn't say it was hot.
Well, not like now, but it's not.
No. Now it's no. This is right at the beginning of testing. So
your generation that started it all.
I'm afraid so. Well,
I'm super excited to find out like your feelings when you was running. You did 50 kilometers, on the race. How many races did you do during the Olympics? Was it just 1 or 2?
No, the problem was if you did a race and you had a bad race, that would reduce your confidence. I mean, some people did a race. We went out and did sort of fast training sessions, which was sort of race-like, and we did about 2 a week, I think, around the Mexican motor race track. But we didn't actually have a genuine race. Looking back, what I think we should have done is, of course, it's very expensive and money was limited and time was limited, but to have gone out to Mexico a year, 6 months prior to the games and had a race at that altitude, so you would know exactly what you're letting yourself in for.
True.
Because I mean, to all of us, it was an unknown quantity. I know. Now it depends what event you're doing. If you're up at 7,000 feet, if you're a long jumper like Bob Beamon, you know, he broke the world record by, what was it, a meter almost. And of course, long jump, less gravity, so you go further. And the same with the shot put. But if you've got the javelin throwers bounce the javelin on the air, less air, so it's not so good. Now, for 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, the famous one was, of course, Dave Hemry's gold medal. It doesn't make any difference. In fact, there's less air, so you go faster. But the difficulty comes with 5,000, 10,000 meters. And I think Ron Clark got a heart condition, and I think it was because he ran the 10,000 meters in Mexico. I think that was the cause of it. But the interesting thing was that once you got into the marathon and the walks, the reduction in performance was not as great as it was for 10,000 meters percentage-wise. So it didn't seem to, in the event, it didn't seem to have as much influence. But even so, it was pretty difficult.
You came 18th in the end.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Explain that. Talk us through that event.
Well, as I say, there were press releases which said we would die. There's no question about that. There was also a students' riot, and they were threatening to shoot us. And then you've got the altitude. So we knew that Paul Nihill had a chance of a medal because he'd got the silver medal in Tokyo, the previous games. So he would go out at the front, and we were, Alf Cotton was the coach, or chef de keep or whatever. And then Brian Ely and myself would start off relatively slowly and come through. That was the overall team thing. We were bussed down to the start, and then we were put in this white room with Mexican music playing and so on. It was about an hour before the start, and then now in Mexico in the afternoon there were thunderstorms, which we thought would be fine, every afternoon, except that one. And it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit when we started at 2:00 in the afternoon. And we were sitting in this holding pen for about 20 minutes. And then we were led down onto the track. And you line up in roughly where the officials think you will finish in the race. So I was in the third sort of group. And the gun went, and off we went. And Brian and I decided we would take it relatively gently because we didn't know what was going to happen. And Paul went off right at the front. And you go out of the stadium onto a dual carriageway called the Avenida Insurgentes. And I think there was one person from El Salvador behind us, so we were virtually last. And we gradually worked our way through the field. The first thing that seemed very odd was that at about 10 kilometers, we passed Bernhard Leuchke from East Germany sitting on the side of the road, and he'd collapsed. And you don't have an East German collapse in 10 first kilometers. And then we got to a right turn. We're going out to the fencing stadium. You could see it's a dome shape, and you could see it right in the distance. And it was about a sort of 10 miles away. And at that point, I was with Frank Clark from Australia, Brian Ely, and Gertz Klopfer from the United States. And we caught up Jose Pedraza, who had just won the silver medal for Mexico in the 20 kilometers. And that was Mexico's first ever Olympic medal. Really? So there were a whole group of people. I would think about 40 or 50 running in behind the crowd, going Pedraza, Pedraza. You know, it went on for about 5 miles, and then I hit rather a bad patch. I mean, you've got to realise that, you know, the temperature was still sort of pretty high. Brian went on. I'd got to a place called the Viaducta Talaupan, and we had soldiers every 10 meters, both sides of the road, in case, you know, because there might be riots. And in my case, it was doctors. And the doctor came up and said to me, do you want to retire? So I said, and I could see Gennady Agapov, who held the world record, getting it from Russia, getting into an ambulance. So I thought, well, if I can get up the slope and pass him, at least I can say I passed the world record holder. And I got up and we came back onto the Avenida Insurgentes, and there's about 5 kilometers to the stadium. And at that point, I was firmly convinced I was last. You come up a slope and you can see the stadium light in front of you. And I was walking towards it, but there, between the Avenida Insurgentes with their lights and the stadium, there was nothing. And somebody took a photograph of me with a flashbulb, which totally disoriented me, and I walked into a tree. Anyway, I managed to get down on the track, and I looked round, and there's Bob Gardner from Australia behind me. So I thought, well, a big sprint towards the end, and then so I finished, and was quite unwell at that point.
But you did it. You went to.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was they carried us off in an ambulance. And as we were going out, somebody said, "Oh, there's Shaun Lightman, who from Israel," and he was just finishing as we were being carried off. And there were about sort of 10, 15 people behind me.
At the time, was you given a Great Britain top? And do you still have
yes.
the top? Do you still?
I've still got it. Yes, and you get a suit. I've still got the suit. Can't get into it because I'm a bit broader now. In fact, I put on a lot of weight between the Olympic Games and the Commonwealth Games, because I was in Edinburgh, and my 2 suits are entirely different. It must have been the weight training that I'd been doing in between.
So you did the Olympics. What was there for you, Shaun, afterwards? Because how can you being part of the Olympics? What happened after that with you?
Oh, I was I was very, very disappointed with my Olympic performance. I mean, I finished with 4 hours 50, and my best that year had been 4 hours 20.
But
so
the Olympics, Shaun, not many people had even left their town or city back then. You've left the country and represented it.
Yes, well, mum was a bit isolated. I mean, my mum thought that the Isle of Wight was foreign. And in fact, the first place I visited overseas was East Germany. So I think she was a bit worried. And of course, you can't phone. That was the other thing. I mean, I wanted to phone mum and dad, and if they gave me a time slot, and what they had to do was to connect each country. So you, on the phone, you could hear them talking in different languages, getting through to England. And eventually they phoned mum and dad, and I said, "You may have seen me carried off." And then we were cut off. That was it.
You came, like I said, you came home. You had did you get a reception when you come back? Did you get another letter from Prince Philip and the Queen saying well done, or was it?
No. You get invited to the Buckingham Palace for a garden party, and of course Prince Philip was at the Mexican in the village, so we had lunch with him at one stage. Well, me and 200 others.
Yes.
I decided that while I was at the top, then I would keep going, and I carried on. So my next event was the World Championship and the Commonwealth Games, and then after that another World Champion. Well, the Munich Olympics. I didn't qualify because it was a baking hot day, and I don't like the heat. But I should have gone to Munich.
Was that one of your biggest regrets in life, not going?
Oh, I was very disappointed. Heartbroken. Yes, it was. I would have done quite well there, I think. Because the next year I did the World Championship, and I think I finished 16th in the world because standards had gone up quite considerably by then. So so that was a real disappointment. But it's all because of the weather. That's what I put it down to. And then I had to decide: do I carry on or do I give up? And the teaching got quite onerous at one stage. So I thought, well, I'll still keep going because I've got a lot of friends. And as you may know, teachers are very inward looking. And I thought, well, athletics gives me the opportunity to do something else and to mix with people, a rather unusual group of people you've never otherwise met. And then I decided to take up coaching. So as I declined physically, then I did a bit of coaching, which was quite good, and I still do.
I'm pleased to hear that. I was going to ask you did it lead into something more?
Yes.
Actually taking part in the sport. This is brilliant. And you still coach now, or you retired?
Oh, yes. I've got a small group of about 3 or 4 people I coach.
Do you have a name, your little group? Give them a shout out.
We don't have a name as a group. No, they're members of Blackheath and Bromley. And so, and we train at Norman Park. Normally, I mean, I haven't seen them for ages because of COVID. But yes, and they have done, some of them done pretty well in the past. So one of them, as a junior, as a very youngster, had an international against Ireland and won. So they do quite well.
So anyone that was listening to this, just to round this off, Shaun, and was thinking, I wouldn't mind giving this race walking a try. What advice would you give?
See if you can find a club or a coach, someone that will help you, and look for events. And in this country, I think you're looking at events in London, the Midlands, Leicester, Birmingham, Leeds. Leeds is the centre of British race walking at the moment. So, and Wales. Try and find someone that knows what they're talking about, really. Now you can do that by going to the UK Athletics website, and that will give you coaches that they can contact, or join join a club is the answer. And that's really important.
Thank you for sharing your walking tale, even though this is called running tale, but we just have to call this episode the walking tales.
Okay, right. Thank you very much for asking me.